It's time for weekly news highlights, where we look back at the top stories of the week. Tensions on the peninsula flared over the week. North Korea denounced South Korea over the partial suspension of a 2018 military tension reduction agreement. Seoul took the step in retaliation for Pyongyang's launching of a military spy satellite. Israel and Hamas on Thursday agreed to extend their temporary ceasefire in Gaza right before the previous two-day extension was set to expire. Around 100 Hamas-held hostages have been released in exchange for some 200 Palestinian prisoners. The Saudi capital, Riyadh, will host the World Expo 2030. The South Korean port city of Busan was a strong candidate but fell short in the final vote. The Korean Prime Minister has since expressed his regret over not being able to bring this long-anticipated world event to Busan. Starting on the domestic front, the presidential office in Yongsan had a reshuffle. President Yoon Suk-yeol not only created a group for policy planning, but also appointed new senior secretaries, all part of efforts to better coordinate policies during the remaining 3 years of incumbency. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon leads us off.
President Yoon Suk-yeol on Friday launched a new group for policy planning that will report directly to him as part of efforts to strengthen his policy drive. According to the announcement on Thursday morning, current Senior Secretary for Policy Planning Lee Kwan-sup will be promoted to director of the group and will oversee work directly under the president.
The establishment of the Director of Policy position is to strengthen the coordination and consultation functions with the cabinet and the party, to accelerate the implementation of policies, and to more closely monitor economic policies in order to look after the livelihoods of the people.
Previously, only the Chief of Staff and the National Security Office worked directly under the President, with the Chief of Staff overseeing policy planning. The Director of Policy will be in charge of Senior Secretaries for Economic and Social Affairs, formerly under the Chief of Staff, as well as the soon-to-be-created Senior Secretary for Science and Technology. He will also be looked at as a level of minister.
Current economic indicators show recovery, but people are still facing difficulties. I'll prioritize taming inflation and use all available policies to do so.
This new office, while new for this administration, has been around under previous presidents. In fact, it was a role that President Yoon scrapped as he took office to minimize the size of the top office, but the revival shows President Yoon is motivated to put more effort into pushing policies harder. On top of this, President Yoon has new senior secretaries for all 5 remaining senior secretary positions who will start their roles next Monday. For public relations, former presidential spokesperson Lee Do-eun has been promoted. For political affairs is also a promotion, as Han Ho-seop, former secretary for state affairs monitoring, will take on the role. For civil and social agenda, Hwang Sang-moo, the former main anchor for Korea Broadcast Systems News, has been named. For economic affairs, Park Chun-seop and Chang Sang-yoon for social policy. As the new appointees briefly addressed the media, they all acknowledged that the situation is hard, whether it's social division or economic hardships. And as next year will bring President Yoon's 3rd year in office, while the country next April will vote for its National Assembly members, the new appointments will have a lot to get done right away. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
North Korea appears to be increasing its military activities near the inter-Korean border following its recent termination of the 2018 military agreement. The regime is believed to be rebuilding its guard post and bringing back heavy firearms along the border. For more on this, we have our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung joining me in the studio. Welcome, Min-jung.
Happy to be here.
All right, Min-jung, what exactly is the North up to?
In South Korea's military revealed that North Korea has been working to restore its guard post in the demilitarized zone right after it announced last week that it would restore all military measures and terminate the September 19th Inter-Korean military agreement. Seoul's military revealed pictures on Monday showing that North Korea dispatched soldiers and heavy weapons to restore its surveillance post near the inter-Korean border. So the soldiers were also spotted on guard duty at night. Now, under the 2018 Inter-Korean military agreement, North Korea destroyed 10 out of its 11 guard posts near the border as part of efforts to reduce tensions on the Korean peninsula. And so did South Korea. but restoration efforts are now being seen in the north at all 11 guard posts. South Korea's defense ministry said the military will be fully prepared to immediately implement countermeasures.
We clearly state that our military is closely monitoring North Korea's provocations and is fully prepared to punish North Korea immediately, strongly, and to the end, based on Seoul and Washington's strengthened joint defense posture.
And Min-jung, speaking of countermeasures, is South Korea likely to restore its own guard posts in response?
Well, South Korea's Deputy Principal National Security Advisor said Seoul is considering the same measures in response, meaning we could be restoring frontline guard posts as well. Speaking to reporters on Monday, the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Kim Myung-soo, also hinted at the possibility of restoring South Korea's guard posts as a corresponding measure, saying that it comes down to how the, quote, enemy decides to act. On top of this, South Korea's defense ministry reiterated that it's necessary to completely suspend the September 19th military pact, as the South has only partially suspended the agreement on a clause relating to aerial surveillance.
The Ministry of National Defense has continuously explained that the military agreement imposes various restrictions on military operations. We have conveyed our opinion to relevant entities that, if necessary, a complete suspension is needed.
I see. And we also hear that North Korean soldiers stationed at Panmunjom are now armed with handguns. So South Korean authorities, for their part, have called on for their soldiers there to respond decisively to any acts of provocation. Could you tell us more on that?
Right, Pyongyang is reportedly arming its soldiers who are deployed at Panmunjom Joint Security Area. According to multiple military sources, North Korean soldiers have been carrying sidearms while on duty since the latter half of last week. South Korean soldiers in the area remain unarmed. The United Nations Command, which is in charge of the Joint Security Area, is reportedly weighing options while closely monitoring Pyongyang's moves. Under the military agreement in 2018, soldiers on both sides in Panmunjom agreed to be unarmed while on duty. But if the North persists in arming its troops in the JSA, it's possible that South Korean soldiers will be ordered to carry firearms as well.
And tensions have flared since North Korea tried attempting its third spy satellite launch, right?
Right, as you said, North Korea's increased military activities come after it terminated the inter-Korean military agreement following South Korea's decision to partially suspend the pact due to North Korea's recent spy satellite launch. Earlier this week, Pyongyang said its spy satellite had taken images of the White House, the Pentagon, and other U.S. military facilities. But the U.S. has downplayed North Korea's claims, saying that there are plenty of images of the White House and the Pentagon already available online. Experts are also skeptical of the quality of the images, as the regime has yet to release the photos they have allegedly taken, and it's also known to take 4 to 6 months to verify whether a satellite is working properly.
We'll definitely have to keep our eyes on that front. In the meanwhile, in response to Pyongyang's launch, Washington on Thursday slapped additional sanctions against the North, right?
Right, the U.S. government slapped sanctions on the North Korean hacking group Kim Soo-ki, as well as 8 foreign-based North Korean nationals. The U.S. says Kim Soo-ki helped facilitate sanctions evasion to support the North's weapons of mass destruction programs, and the Treasury Department added that the group uses spear phishing to target individuals employed by government, as well as entities in Europe, Japan, Russia, South Korea, and the U.S. Meanwhile, Washington also announced that South Korea, the U.S., Japan, and Australia are each coordinating the imposition of sanctions on North Korean individuals in response to this recent spy satellite launch. It's reportedly the first time the 4 countries have issued coordinated sanctions on the regime.
That just points to how flared of tensions we'll be seeing throughout the week. Thank you so much, Min-jung, for the wrap-up.
My pleasure.
Over in Gaza, just minutes before the deadline, Israel and Hamas agreed to extend their truce by 1 more day. This opened the gateway for hostages and prisoners to return home to their families. Park Gun-woo reports.
Just 10 minutes before its expiration, Israel and Hamas agreed to extend their truce in the Gaza Strip under the same previous conditions for another extra day. The Israeli Prime Minister's office said on Thursday that the truce will continue as Israel was given a new list of women and minors for potential release beforehand, though not mentioning an exact number. Israel had agreed to extend the truce by 1 day for every 10 living hostages released, and noted it would resume fighting if that condition was not met. Meanwhile, Qatar, one of the negotiators between Israel and Hamas, also confirmed the extension in a statement made by its foreign ministry on Thursday. The ministry added that negotiations continue in hope of reaching a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Thanks to continuous efforts by these mediators, including Qatar, Egypt, and the US, more captives are set to be released and more humanitarian aid convoys are scheduled to enter Gaza. Just before the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas was due to expire at 7 a.m. on Thursday local time, 16 hostages were released by Hamas, including 10 Israelis, 4 Thai nationals, and 2 Russians. They were handed over to the Red Cross late Wednesday on the 6th day of the truce and were taken to 5 different hospitals in Israel. In exchange, Israel also released 30 Palestinians, mostly women and minors. Over the first 5 days of the ceasefire, which began last Friday, Hamas released 81 hostages and Israel freed 180 Palestinians from prison, mainly women and minors. Park Gonu, Arirang News.
The prime architect of U.S. foreign policy, Henry Kissinger, died on Wednesday at the age of 100. Kissinger formerly served as U.S. National Security Advisor and also as the Secretary of State during the Nixon and Ford administrations in the 1960s and 70s. Apart from saying he died at his home in Connecticut, no further information concerning the circumstances was given by his geopolitical consulting firm, Kissinger Associates. Kissinger led many diplomatic breakthroughs for Washington. He laid the groundwork for U.S.-China relations and also contributed to ending American involvement in the Vietnam War. That paved the way for him to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in 1973. 2 years later, he also proposed the 4-party talks on the Korean peninsula involving South and North Korea, the U.S., and China. South Korea's dreams of hosting the World Expo 2030 have ended with the port city of Busan losing out to Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh. Kim Jung-sil with the details.
Saudi Arabia's capital city Riyadh will host the 2030 World Expo. Riyadh won 119 votes in the first round of voting against Busan's 29 votes and 17 votes for Rome. With the Saudi capital claiming more than 2/3 of the votes from the 165 participating countries, the host was decided without the need for a runoff vote. The South Korean government solemnly accepted the result in the crushing defeat.
I sincerely apologize for not being able to return the support people have given us, and I feel a heavy sense of responsibility.
The Prime Minister added he will further develop the diplomatic assets gained from visiting more than 180 countries as part of the campaign to host a global mega event in South Korea's second-largest city of Busan. Representatives from the southern city were disappointed at the result, but said the city would actively consider making a bid for the World Expo event in 2035. Pundits had said Busan's bid was already a long shot considering Riyadh had begun a substantial marketing campaign a year ahead of South Korea, with Busan only joining the campaign in the summer of last year. Experts from Busan's campaign said the astronomical amount of capital available to Saudi enabled its delegation to offer direct and immediate aid solutions to voter countries, which might have helped the result. Even though South Korea tasted the bitterness of defeat, experts added the 17-month-long international bidding process would give know-how and create opportunities for future market development. The World Expo can take place for up to 6 months and has a legacy of creating economic benefits and jobs, with tens of millions of visitors from all around the world attending. The most recent World Expo took place in Dubai between October 2021 and March 2022. The next World Expo will take place in Osaka in 2025. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
For the 7th time straight, the Bank of Korea has decided to maintain its key interest rate at 3.5%. Our economic correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
South Korea's central bank has again kept its key interest rate unchanged at 3.5% as widely expected. The decision was announced on Thursday following a Monetary Policy Committee meeting.
Despite the higher-than-expected inflation growth, a slowdown is anticipated. Considering the impact of the prolonged monetary tightening of the US Fed and rising external uncertainty, including geopolitical risks, we have decided to keep a tightened monetary policy. The Board of Governors voted unanimously to maintain the current tightening stance.
For a seventh straight meeting, the Bank of Korea has decided to freeze the rate. The base rate has been held at 3.5% since February, following 10 consecutive rate hikes to tame inflation beginning in August 2021. Analysts say the central bank sees no need to raise the key interest rate solely to address soaring household debt, as it could further weaken consumer spending and investment. Meanwhile, the BOK on Thursday maintained its economic growth outlook for this year at 1.4%, while it slashed the outlook for next year by 0.1 of a percentage point to 2.1% from the previous projection in August.
Exports have been improving lately, but it'd be difficult to expect a significant increase. Domestic demand is sluggish as well. These factors led to the BOK and the IMF lowering their outlooks for next year's economic growth. Small businesses and the self-employed are facing challenges. In this regard, the government needs to prioritize the economy with relevant policies.
Consumer price growth is expected to be at 3.6% this year, up from its previous forecast of 3.5%. The BOK also raised the figure for next year to 2.6% from 2.4%. Inflation slowed during the first half of this year but rebounded in August, and the increase lasted until last month to 3.8%, the highest in 7 months due to higher oil costs and rising prices for some agricultural goods. The BOK governor said during a press conference that a committee member who had previously suggested the possibility of rate cuts withdrew that statement during Thursday's meeting amid a growing necessity to tame inflation. The Bank of Korea said that it will maintain high interest rates for a sufficiently long period until it's confident that consumer price inflation will slow to the target level of 2%, emphasizing that it is too early to consider rate cuts. 신하영, Arirang News.
As part of efforts to strengthen emerging industries such as biohealth and green technology, Seoul's Economy Ministry pledged to ease bureaucratic red tape. Lee Soo-jin tells us more.
South Korea's government is taking steps to bolster emerging industries by reforming and improving current regulations. Finance Minister Chu Kyo-ho, in an emergency meeting on the economy with related ministers on Monday, said that while South Korea's economy is showing signs of recovery, the government needs to continue fostering promising businesses in the biohealth, green technology, and ocean mobility industries. One way the government is planning to do this is in the biohealth industry, where clearer standards will be set for newly created health services. It also plans to ease regulations that will encourage the development of healthcare services that use smart technology.
We plan to expand the scope of permitted new medical services by revising guidelines that will encourage the launch of various healthcare services, such as those that will help patients monitor blood pressure and diabetes.
And the biohealth industry is not the only area that the government is planning to reform. In the green technology industry, the government is looking to ease regulations to allow for more revamping and repowering of old solar and wind power plants and support the entry of carbon capture companies into industrial complexes. It also plans to discuss ways to expand tax support for low-carbon aviation fuels. As part of its efforts to go green and boost emerging industries, the South Korean government has set a target to expand the global market share of the domestic smart ocean mobility sector to 12% by 2027. This comes as the International Maritime Organization adopted a strategy to reach net zero emissions from international shipping by around 2050 and set targets to enact a regulatory code for maritime autonomous surface ships by 2028. To expand global market share, the South Korean government plans to boost the transition from fossil fuels to alternative fuels for ships by providing various subsidies and tax benefits. It would also further support R&D for the development of green ship technology. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea's population crisis isn't getting any better. The country saw its total fertility rate in the third quarter of this year drop to the lowest ever recorded for this period. Park Gun-woo reads through the figures.
South Korea's population is seeing a further decline. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the total fertility rate in the third quarter fell 0.1 to 0.7 children per woman, the lowest for any third quarter. Data also showed that there were nearly 10,000 more deaths than births in September. There were around 18,000 births that month, a drop of 14.6% compared to the same month the year before. The figure is the biggest percentage drop recorded both this year and for any September since data was first compiled in 1981. It was also the sharpest on-year decrease in about 3 years. As for the third quarter as a whole, the number of births hovered above the 56,000 line, a drop of around 12% on year, the lowest ever figure for any quarter 3. An official from Statistics Korea said a continued downward trend in the number of marriages has been a major factor behind falling birth figures. The number of marriages in September this year dropped 12% on year, once again recording a new low for any September since 1981. Divorces were also down about 8% compared to 2022. There were about 28,000 deaths in September, a slight decrease compared to the month and year before. Statistics Korea said they would investigate the specific reason the number of deaths dropped, as they usually surge comparatively at that time of year. Park Geon-woo, Arirang News.
As the country grapples with labor shortages, South Korea will allow those with E-9 non-professional employment visas to work in more industries from next year. According to the Ministry of Employment and Labor on Monday, the range of industries for E-9 visa holders has been expanded to restaurants as well as mining and forestry sectors. Officials have also decided to bring a record-breaking figure of over 165,000 non-professional migrant workers next year. That's 45,000 more than this year. Manufacturing will accept the largest number of non-professional employees at 95,000, followed by agriculture and livestock sectors at around 16,000. Those were the top stories of the week. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again on Monday with the latest news.